I've had the privilege over the years to how many people retire. And it's something that I have found is there's a significant amount of confusion and frustration when it comes to Social Security, when it comes to our different types of retirement accounts and the tax strategies. And a lot of times people are saying, how did this happen? How did we get here? And why didn't we have maybe some better direction, better types of retirement accounts than what we have today? And so I think it's very helpful to understand how it's all evolved, the evolution of retirement and the evolution of Social Security as well. So I'm going to take you on a little journey here, and we're going to go through the timeline and the evolution of retirement. Welcome back to the Financial Fast Lane. My name is Lane Martinson. And so retirement really is a modern day concept. Retirement means many different things to different people, but just the general concept of retirement has changed dramatically over the years. So let's go back in time. We're going to go back to 1900, and then we're going to come all the way to present day. And so back in 1900, life expectancy in the United States was only 49. We used to die of infectious disease, and we just didn't live nearly as long as we do nowadays. The healthcare system was nowhere near what it is today. Now, the idea of retirement was not really a concept back then. Retirement was actually resisted because it's just another way of saying unemployment, right? And so back then, those that were older, they wanted to continue to work and to continue to be employed for as long as they possibly could. So there was no retirement accounts, right? There were no pensions. There was nothing like that. The whole concept was quite foreign, really. And so now the world has changed a lot, right? Back then, transportation was very difficult. You had horse and buggy, maybe a train if you had one that was going where you needed to go. It wasn't until 1903 when the Wright brothers had their first flight, right? That 12 seconds of time in the air. And so it was the very beginning of aviation. By 1908 was really kind of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We had Henry Ford, who started to make the first horseless carriage, right? The Model T. And so slowly, more and more people started to have cars. There was no infrastructure, roads to handle it. It was mostly dirt roads, right? But slowly things changed. Now, by 1920 was the first pension that was offered through the post office. So you had these postal workers who started to get older, and so the government created the first pension for these older postal workers once they reached age 65. Back then, the average person did not have access to an investment portfolio. They basically had savings at the bank, right, or into real estate. But it wasn't until 1924 when the first mutual fund was launched in the United States. The mutual fund solved a problem. It made it accessible for people to invest in companies in a convenient way. And so the mutual fund industry has a whole life and history of its own as it evolved over time. Now, it was 1933 when the railroads offered a pension. So we're starting to see the very beginnings of when pensions started to be offered. It was during the 1930s when telephones just started to get into homes. And so technology was in its infancy, right? 1920 was the very first radio broadcast ever. And most people didn't have radios. But by 1940, television was just coming onto the scene barely during the World Fair. 1933 was the television. And so the 40s, the 50s is when people started actually having televisions and radio. So there started to be commercial flights. So things really started to change, right? By 1935 is when Social Security was established. And part of the reason why it was established at that point was because life expectancy had increased significantly. So in 1935, life expectancy had gone from 49 years, 1900, all the way up to 62 years. And so this was in the news. This was like, hey, we're living longer. And so there started to be more concern about the aging population. And that was kind of the foundation of Social Security. So Social Security was established, and the earliest age that someone could claim benefits back then was age 65. Life expectancy was only 62. And so it was really only intended for those that were kind of the older segment of the population, not thinking that most people would ever need Social Security, right? And that's how it started. Now, of course, Social Security has changed a lot. It's been modified a lot. The way people think of it has changed over the years. But that was 1935. So now let's fast forward to 1960. By then, most large employers are now offering pensions. And so that became the retirement plan, right? You worked for a company during your career, and once you retired, you had a pension. Now, let's fast forward to 1974. This is when ERISA first came into being. So the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, this law was passed to help regulate pensions, right, and to set certain standards. But fast forward to 1975, and the cost of offering pensions by these companies was becoming a very heavy burden, right? And so the companies offering the pensions were looking for a way to reduce the risk, reduce the expense. So in 1978, the Revenue Act gave birth to the 401k. And so that is when the 401k first came into existence, and it was based on the idea that an employer could allow an employee to defer some of their compensation, tax deferred, so it could be used later in retirement. And the companies offering pensions, when they discovered the 401k, they were very anxious to adopt it and to put an end to their pensions. And it's because the pensions were expensive to offer. The pensions had a lot of risk because the employer was responsible for the investments for the pensions. With the 401k, they shifted that responsibility to the employee. So now the employee had the full responsibility of whatever investments they might choose. And the employees could then defer some of their income. The companies would still offer a match most of the time. So they were contributing and incentivizing that. But that's where the 401k started. And so we saw pensions shrinking drastically in the years to come. By 1990, our national debt was $2.9 trillion. It would be nice if that's what our debt was today, right? But it wasn't this big, massive debt problem like we have today. Let's fast forward to 1997. That was when the Roth IRA was first established. The Roth has become something that's so important to us now, but it really hasn't been around that long, right? That was William Roth was the senator, and that's where that name comes from, the Roth IRA, where we can have tax-free growth. Now, fast forward to the year 2000, ETFs and FIAs were just in their infancy. So there starts to be more and more innovation within the financial services industry. There became more transparency, lower fees, certain types of ways to guarantee your income while your money can still grow productively. So there starts to be more and more innovation. By the year 2004, the DST, or the Delaware Statutory Trust, became a legal option. It's a way to hold real estate. And specifically, it's a way to do a 1031 into securitized real estate. So what that means is, so if you invest in real estate, let's say you have a rental property. If you were to sell that property, there's significant tax consequences, depreciation, recapture. And so what you can do is you can do it, if you want to sell a property, you can do a 1031 exchange. It's basically like a rollover into another like-kind property. But for people who want to retire and retire from being a landlord, and they don't want the headaches and the risks associated, they can now do a 1031 exchange into a Delaware statutory trust, which is securitized real estate. So it'd be becoming a fractional owner, say a nice new multifamily apartment building or medical facility or whatever. But it's a way to own real estate, and it's a way to roll your other holdings into that securitized real estate. So that's a big deal for a lot of people that just wasn't around before, right? In 2006, it was when the Roth 401k became a thing. And so it hasn't really been around all that long. By 2011 is when the baby boomers first started to retire. And so retiring on average at about 10,000 per day in the United States. And they have been retiring at that rate since 2011, and they will continue at that rate for the next 10 years. And so this is a major shift in our demographics. We definitely have an aging population and a shrinking workforce, and it has implications. It will change things. 2020 was the first year that Social Security was not able to pay all the Social Security benefits strictly from the tax revenue that was flowing into the Treasury. And so that year, when they started to dip into the Social Security trust funds. And so the projection is, assuming there are no changes or reforms, then Social Security trust funds would be depleted about 2034. I have another video where I discuss that issue specifically, and I'll put a link to that here down below. But the landscape is changing. The landscape has changed, right? In 2023, our national debt has ballooned to $32 trillion. It's unprecedented. In the history of the world, there's never been a time where any country has had that much debt. And so it's public debt, and the way that debt gets paid is through the public, right? It's through taxes. And so taxes, we believe, are going to be higher in the future. And so when you have tax-deferred retirement accounts, you're deferring the tax until down the road, when taxes, we believe, are likely to be higher. We already know they're going to be higher as of 2026. But, and so there's a fair amount of frustration with how did we get in this situation, right? But there are some really important planning strategies that you can implement. Planning and distribution planning has never been as important as it is now, because typically retirement is going to last 25, 30 years. And so are you going to be unemployed for 25, 30 years? Where's your income coming from? Will you have enough? Will you run out? There's so many issues. A really good plan can make a significant difference. And so retirement distribution planning has never been as important as it is now. So I hope this has given you a new perspective and you found it beneficial. Hope you'll give us a thumbs up, maybe share this video and subscribe. You can go to the financialfastlane.com for more information, for some free resources. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Financial Fast Lane.